Well, today we've got a Silverface Musicmaster bass. The not very coveted, not very expensive, poorly regarded bass amp that Fender made in the 70s. And there's been kind of a groundswell of opinion that these might be great amps after all. They're hand-wired, all-tube amps. Some people love them just the way they are. Some people advocate mods. We're going to go through this one step by step, making mods and listening tests as we go to see what we can turn this thing into. So if you like them stock, great. I don't think you will. Once we go through the mods, I think you'll find we can make it a much better amp, and we're going to show you what we do and the results as we go. Well, there we go. We've got the chassis out, and it looks unmolested. And what's the first thing you have to do before you start getting your fingers in a tube amp? Drain those capacitors. I've already checked them with the meter, and they are still holding voltage. So we're going to use our jumper clips to drain it. And that's putting one over here on the chassis. And we can put the other one, we got a lead exposed right here. So we can put that right there on the main filter coming in. And we found in the past that by doing that, that drains all the voltage in this amp here in a minute or so. It'll be dead and down to nothing. So that's the first thing you do. Use your voltmeter to double check to make sure there's no voltage in these caps before you get your finger in there. Second thing on a Musicmaster, get rid of this cap. This is the one that if it were to short out, you'd get one leg of the AC on the chassis. You don't want that. So that's the second thing we're going to do, is remove the death cap. Third thing, and right now anyway, is we know when we tested the amp that the pots were dirty, so we're going to clean the pots. Then we'll start our modifications. So while we wait for our capacitors to come in that we've ordered, because we want to do a cap job on this old amp, first area we're going to focus on is the volume and tone. And the way this is set up right now doesn't sound all that good, and you don't get much out of your tone control, and it certainly doesn't sound very musical. So what do? Well, we're going to follow a Tweed Princeton layout. This 5F2 layout here shows that they've got a 500 picofarad from the volume pot to the tone pot, and an 005 from the tone pot to ground. And we're going to rewire ours to match this. Now you notice they've got 1 meg pots here, and a Musicmaster has 250K pots. Well, you can change them. You could even use 500K pots if you want. But you really don't need to, so we're not going to. What you'll find on the volume, for example, if you leave the 250 in there, is that it's pretty clean at 3, but by 4 it's much louder and starting to break up. You use a 500, it'd smooth that out. So you might be able to turn it up to 5. It wouldn't be any louder. It would just kind of even out the way the volume pot works. So it's really not necessary, and we're not going to change it here. We're just going to rewire the capacitors and the way this is wired on the Musicmaster to follow the Princeton layout. Well, we've got everything disconnected because we need to take the volume pot out. And we need to do that because we want to take the wire that currently goes to the center tab of the pot, and it comes back over to pin 2 of the 12AX7. We need to replace that with a shielded wire. We found in previous mods that this wire right here is the one that, if it's not properly placed, you get a lot more noise. So for example, if it happens to be run on the other side of this cap, you get some static and some noise, and depending on where it sits in the chassis, it's noisy. This will help solve that, keep the noise down. We're going to ground one end of the pot, and of course, so you don't create a ground loop, you only ground one end. Then the other end will come to pin 2, and we're all set. So that's why we removed the pot, so we could solder the ground side of the shielded cable to the pot. Interestingly enough, by the way, notice that the pot 1377601, the pot is dated to the first week of 1976. Everything else in this amp is from 78. So old Fender had quite a pile of pots laying around. Alright, we've got that laid in, and now we've loosened the tone pot so that the jumper from the center tab of the tone pot has to be moved all the way over to the first tab of the volume pot. And to make sure the wire that's there is long enough, you loosen the pot a little bit, and you can solder it in and tuck it up under the chassis just like it should be. There. Now what also goes to that first lug of the volume pot is the wire that comes from the 01 ceramic disc. So we've got those hooked up there. Now we can tuck this up out of our way, and we can turn the pot back to a spot where we can work on it, and we'll tighten that back up and continue. So remember, the parts we took out had this protected sleeve material over the leads so they didn't touch each other when you put them in there. Well, you can use that when you put your new parts in. And there we go, we're all set up. We got the 500 picofarad there, the 0047 here. So now it's wired just like the volume and tone pot on a 5F2 Princeton. Now we're going to move over just a little bit. We talked about this 01 ceramic disc that's in here. That's got to go. We're going to put an 02 in there. And in this place where the 20 microfarad 300 volt cap is, this is an axial cap. We're going to put a radial cap in there because it sits in there nicely and fits. Most 20 microfarad caps you find aren't this small unless you go order one out of Mauser or something like that, but a Sprague or an F&T are bigger than this. So we're going to put a radial in there. And then we've got these two caps to change to 25 microfarad, 25 microfarad instead of a 10 and a 2 that are in there now. So we'll change those. We'll change this to an 02. Alright, there we go. An 02, a 25-25, and a 25-25. So that part's done. Now I can tell you, in other modded Musicmasters we've done, there's been some talk, certainly on the internet and elsewhere, where you should replace this 470 with a 1 meg, and you should replace this cap with a straight jumper wire from here to there, just like a lot of other amps you see. In fact, you'll see the same thing in our Princeton. I've tried that, and I didn't hear any differences, so I just leave those alone. But one thing we do want to do is up here at the inputs. We see on the Princeton and many other Fender amps, there's usually a 1 meg on the number 1 input, and there isn't any here. So we're going to add a 1 meg to the first input, leave the second input alone. This will get a touch brighter, a touch gainier. There is a difference. So you'd have the stock input and one with a 1 meg across it. And you can see that even on the Princeton layout, where you look at their two inputs, and they've got a 1 meg across the number 1 input. And that's what we're going to do. So there we go, we got it squeezed in there. You can see that 1 meg back there. Just got to watch the orientation so this doesn't touch jack number 2 and nothing touches ground on the chassis. Everything works right. So there we go. So we're all done with the mods, and you can stop right there if you want to. We are going to wait for new caps to come in, and by the way, we're going to put a 30 microfarad into the first filtering area, which comes right off the diodes here, and then a regular 20 microfarad back over here. And then of course the final biggest greatest change you can make is a speaker. So we'll be back when we get the caps in and put a new speaker in and see what we've done. Well, here is the greatest change you can make to a Musicmaster bass, and that's getting rid of this speaker. So that's what we're going to do now. Alright, there's our speaker replacement. It is a speaker that was destined for the Fender factory to go in supersonic 22 amps. Theoretically, it's what Fender calls a lightning. It's an eminence speaker, certainly 30 watt, maybe as big as a 50 watt. But we've used them in Fenders on all kinds of amps. They always sound good. So we threw one in here. And then we've taken out those small bottle 6V6s, and we had a old pair of GM branded 6V6s, but they sure look like black plate RCAs to me that were rebranded for GM. And we've got a Fender labeled 7025 in the first stage, and let's try this thing out. Well, alright, here we go. It's about 2.5. It's not quite even on 3, and I can tell you it's already pretty darn loud, but it's still clean. And it sounds really good. Let's crank it up a little bit and see what we get. There's 5. That's 5, and we're in the 4th position on a Strat. Let's try bright. I like it. We're going up a little higher. We're going to try, how about 7? Musicmaster bass. Try our mods, get a good speaker, and enjoy it.